Hello everyone, welcome to the Maitri podcast Between Friends Conversations with Maitri. This is your host Nandini Ray. My production team member Shilpa Sachdev and I are always excited to bring new topics and new guests to you so that we can engage all our listeners in making a better community where there is no interpersonal violence and abuse and every community member feels safe and respected. In today's episode, we will be discussing a very serious crime, and that is human trafficking. Every year, millions of vulnerable human beings are trafficked, and it is still assumed by many of us that human trafficking is happening somewhere else in a different country far from us. But that's a myth. It is happening everywhere, including in the United States of America. It's happening literally in our backyard. And listeners, you will be surprised to know that California consistently has the highest human trafficking rates in the United States, with 1,507 cases reported in 2019. So today we have invited some distinguished guests who have vast experience working with trafficked victims and who are very much engaged in ending this modern day slavery. It's my pleasure to introduce our today's guests, Sharan, Swostika, and Sohal. Sharan Dhanoa is the Director of Strategic Development for the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking. Sharan facilitated the largest multi-county work group in the Bay Area, No Traffic Ahead. Prior to that, Sharan worked with sex trafficked victims in India by aiding their development through economic empowerment. Sharan has worked in crime surveillance and in emergency psychiatric facilities. Swostika Timalsina is a volunteer at Asian Women's Shelter, and she works as a multilingual language advocate for domestic violence and human trafficking survivors. Swastika has been working in Nepali community support group, assisting and navigating immigrant population through county services. Officer Gurbaksh Sohal has been with the San Jose Police Department for the past 8 years. He is currently assigned to the Sjpd Patrol Division, and prior to that, he was assigned to the Sjpd Human Trafficking Task Force Officer, also FBI Human Trafficking Task Force. Officer Sohal investigated juvenile and adult sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and sexual assaults. He conducted multiple undercover rescue operations to locate human trafficking survivors and to apprehend traffickers and sex buyers. Thank you so much, Sharan, Swastika, and Sohal for coming to our show. Do you want to add anything?
No, just thank you for having a conversation that needs to be had, and so look forward to having it.
So listeners, let me tell you that by definition, human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. It can happen in any community, and victims can be of any age, race, gender, or nationality. And traffickers might use violence, manipulation, or false promises of well-paying jobs or romantic relationships to lure victims into trafficking situation. But there are many more different aspects of this serious problem that we will know from our distinguished guests today, who have lots of experience working in this field. So my first question to all three of you, that how do you recognize a traffic victim? Is there any easy way to find out?
I can go first. Thank you for inviting us today. Generally, when I talk with the survivors, I go with how, if there are any reversed and repeated information, when they talk with us, they will just repeat how what they are told. So it sounds reversed and it sounds unnatural conversation. Even though you are having conversation, that is one red flag that they might be ST survivors. And next common thing that I have found while working with ST survivors is they tend to, if you are to ask their salary, how much they earn, they tend to tell it on other countries' currency. Like if they are from Nepal, they will just say in rupees. If they are from India, they will say in IC, and they just generally don't understand how much they are supposed to be earning with the particular job they are doing. So these are two things that is very common in SD survivors that I've noticed.
Hmm. Sharan, what about you?
So we do a lot of trainings for the community. And one of the main things we try to communicate is that trafficking can often look like a lot of other forms of exploitation or abuse. So those red flags might be similar. So you might see a situation where, as Swostika said, had their answers are rehearsed or somebody's speaking for them, right? You may be looking for individuals who do not seem like they're very well kept. So they might not have clothes that are appropriate for the season, or they might look malnutritioned. They may be very careful to make eye contact with you. So they seem fearful that somebody is watching how they're communicating with you. There are obvious signs of exploitation sometimes when we're talking about individuals who are being trafficked in the sex industry. So if you see somebody under the age of 18 and they're being engaging in commercial sex, that is trafficking on its face. So that's a clear indicator. Often trafficking survivors, they may have very few possessions on them. So when we're training hotel staff, we tell them, if you see somebody check in and they have very few belongings, that's a red flag, right? They don't have a lot of their belongings. Or what about their actual personal documents? Do they have, their passport or their ID in their possession? Is somebody else controlling their finances? These are kind of key questions that start indicating that somebody else is in control of their life and really controlling how they are moving, operating, and earning a well-being.
But sometimes it's also possible that they look so normal, and it's very hard for like community members, people like me. I may not find out that this person is trafficked, right? This is also possible.
It is. So, and what's really important is that you don't have to make that determination. As a community member, you may see something, you may notice, in a neighbor who suddenly has relatives living with them, but they have a young boy who's doing yard work all the time. And you may not say definitively that's trafficking, but you know that something doesn't feel right. And that's really all you really need to know to take the next step of maybe reporting it to your local law enforcement, or you can report it to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And then when you start bringing in other experts who can start to flush it out, you can refer to a service provider. Let's say you're speaking to somebody and it really looks like they need help in some way. We'll connect them to a service provider, so that they can start to figure out, is this actually trafficking? Maybe it's actually a situation of domestic violence. Maybe this individual has some other issue. So you don't have to make the determination, but you can see the red flags that may indicate they need help.
Officer Sohal, do you want to add anything?
Everyone brought up great points. Just to quickly touch upon just a couple other indicators. One of the big things is, especially if you're dealing with sex trafficking, that type of violation, there's a lot of movement. So if you have, especially younger age survivors that are moving from city to city, if you have in labor trafficking, people that are working unusual hours, never going on vacation, some of those things that, especially when you bring in a culture component into it, a lot of people understand from culturally. When you start educating yourself as far as what are signs of trafficking, and then put it within the cultural context, a lot of times it's people that that you might have not known, and you're just asking a couple questions. And like Sharon mentioned, one of the big things in law enforcement we always tell people is try not to make those determinations yourself. The whole, it might be cliche, but if you see something, you say something, because you never know what indicators you might be. A lot of people say you got to follow your gut, and a lot of cases are solved that way.
So, Swastika, I know that you have a lot of experience working with South Asian human trafficking survivors. So, tell us that what are the unique challenges immigrant traffic victims face? What did you notice?
There are a lot of challenges to immigrant people to start with. There is language barriers. People who has been trafficked doesn't really know and their own language. The people they're traveling with, they even don't know common, they just do hand gestures, or they will be just communicating with people from third country and third language, not even their own, not English. And it is very difficult for them to understand what is going on, why it is going on like this. There was one of the client I work with, he was trafficked for 5 years of his life. And he did not know the places. There were places he stayed for months, and they did not know like what place name was, where they were really. So language barrier is one thing, and not just while traveling, even after entering United States. If there are underrepresented communities, they don't get interpreter to really talk to officials about what is going on really. And somebody else has to chime in and then say, you know what, I speak, let's say some kind or some other language like Hindi, I speak Chinese, and they will be helping. And when going through those processes, the technical errors which they should not be having happens, and they will be denying asylum one way to the relief to SD survivors, right? We have in the system. So this is one basic challenge we have. There is lack of information. They are really not informed what is going on. They will be told that, you know what, once you enter United States, there will be job available everywhere. You'll be staying with my people. You'll be doing everything. And they would not be informed that they will be abused. They will be taken, like their stuff would be taken away. They will have very less information about country itself and the process. Really from after entering United States, detention centers, these are not told to them. So it's really difficult on that part too. Fear is one other thing. They will be always controlled and then made believe that they have to stay within their control to really go through the process. And they fear for life. So many, and there is hesitation to reach out for services, even though we do have services in communities. And we do have limited services, and there is hesitation. It's really tough on that part.
So actually, I was reading a research that of the nearly 48,000 trafficked victims who were reported to the trafficking hotline, information about immigration status was collected for about only 36%. That means the immigration status of 64% is unknown. So I don't know, maybe people are so scared that they know that if my immigration status is revealed, I'll be in a big trouble. So maybe I don't know what is the reason. So Officer Sohal, you have worked with many immigrant survivors. So please tell us how immigration status can make a victim's life more complicated and what they can do about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The immigration status is obviously a huge barrier for a lot of survivors in coming to law enforcement and reporting. One of the big things, at least every county, every state have different rules and laws. Fortunately, in Santa Clara County, we are a sanctuary county, so we don't work with any type of federal immigration agencies. We make it very clear to the community that, hey, if whatever your immigration status is, we do not care as a law enforcement agency. All we care about is providing services. So if you've been a victim of trafficking, that's the only thing that matters. We do not care about your immigration. And that message is really important where it applies to really get out into the community. That's why as I learned really quickly, is the only way you can fight human trafficking is really working collaboratively with your local community. The South Bay Coalition End Human Trafficking, which Sharan runs, we couldn't do without them. They have a full legal team. Maybe Sharan can maybe jump in and also really point towards, our job is we get the survivors and make sure that they can openly talk to us and not allow any type of immigration status affect that. And that's where we as a community need to make sure that everyone around us understands that and isn't afraid about that. And that's where, doing those partnerships are important. And luckily there are remedies available for people that maybe are worried about that status once the case does move forward.
So what are those remedies?
So there's a T visa, which is the trafficking visa, that's available. There's also the U visa, which is for general assaults, but there's specifically T visas that are available. With the immigration portion of it, there's some survivors that do not want to go through the legal process. And so there are remedies available to just go through it on the civil side of it and not have to go through the criminal aspect of it as well. And I don't know if Sharon wants to chime in if there's other remedies available as well. It's our job to make sure that we connect them to those organizations that can provide those remedies, because I know that's one of the biggest factors, especially with labor trafficking for the survivors, is really trying to ensure that, hey, now that I'm here, sometimes mostly, because you can have labor trafficking from domestic born as well, but for foreign born, it's, hey, what's the next steps going forward? What's my housing look like? What's my financial system look like? Am I gonna get deported? And what does that look like? And the one thing we can say within sanctuary counties is, no, you're not. And there's a lot of organizations and resources, both within cultural competency, available for survivors.
So what you are saying, Officer Sohal, that is very, very important message for all community members to know, so that if anyone is suffering, anyone is trafficked, and if that person is thinking that if I talk to Sjpd, I'll be deported or I'll be facing some serious legal consequences. So they should know that no matter what their immigration status is, they can get help from Sjpd if they're trafficked and if they're calling police, right?
Absolutely. And the one thing I really want to stress is that every county, every state, every locality has their own laws. And so that's just where it's really important to have these community liaisons where people can feel comfortable. I can very comfortably say within Santa Clara County, that is what the case is. If someone comes to us with any type of incident of trafficking, anything that they feel like that might be trafficking, like we said, a lot of times people don't know what it is or what is not. They can talk to a detective and not be worried about the immigration status. And in fact, there's a lot of organizations out there that will then work and assist and help out on legal services, as well as other type of victim services that might be needed, as far as transitioning back into society, especially for people that have been in some type of trafficking situation for a while.
So what are the important steps Sjpd is taking in identifying and helping human trafficking victims?
So one of the big things is, like we said, human trafficking is something of a type of violation that is all around us. A lot of times, like you said, it's a misconception that it's a violation that affects us across borders, but it's something that actually happens within our own neighborhoods. And so that's a big thing with all police departments, but locally here in the Bay Area, partnering with the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking. That way, when we come in contact with survivors of trafficking, the first thing we do is we rely on our community partners. We call them over. That way we can make sure that we have cultural competent services, whether that's food, translation, like I think Swostika mentioned earlier, being able to communicate within your own native language is a huge sometimes barrier just within being able to communicate what happened as far as their traffic situation, familiarity, comfort, because a lot of people don't maybe trust law enforcement. And so we make it a point to really go out there to communities, explain, have presentations. We've done presentations with teachers, with real estate agents, with the Mexican consulate, at the local Gurdwara, different community locations, just to explain to people, this is what trafficking is. these are the signs, these are where you can go out and reach it. Because at the end of the day, with trafficking, the very nature of the violation, it is very tough sometimes for the survivor themselves to come forward. And a lot of times it takes the community, a neighbor, a customer, a family member, to really identify that survivor and maybe alert somebody that can maybe provide them resources. And so it's a combined effort. It's not something that the police department itself can take on by itself.
Yeah, and I also know that you are doing an ad campaign to raise awareness, HD ad campaign. And Sharan, if you want to chime in, if you want to, because I know that South Bay Coalition is a big part of that ad campaign with Sjpd.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So San Jose Police Department and the city of San Jose, they really identified that, even though we do all this different outreach, that we see very low numbers of reporting from Asian Pacific Islander communities, including the South Asian community. And so we really wanted to create a campaign that spoke to these specific communities about what trafficking is and how you can either get support with services or report it to law enforcement. So we worked with Aki, we worked with Maitri, with Community Solutions. A number of community members helped us really create a campaign that speaks directly to Asian Pacific Islander communities. And you'll see the images include members from the community. You'll actually recognize Officer Sohal's face in some of the ad campaign. And we have it translated into Hindi, Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, and English. And you can also check it out on our website, which is southbayendtrafficking.org. And trafficking is TRAFFICKING. So southbayendtrafficking.org. You'll see all the images from the billboard campaign, as well as core information in all of those languages, because we knew that being able to communicate with potential survivors or community members who may know survivors is really important. And it goes back to what Sohal was saying was, we know for a lot of individuals who are being exploited, it's sometimes you just need a little bit of support or encouragement from your loved ones or from a friend to actually reach out for help. So that's what we're really trying to encourage from our own community.
Yeah, that's a wonderful initiative. And I hope people should visit your website to find more information about the ad campaign, and they really help someone who really, needs help to get out of this traffic situation. And Swastika, one question for you, that can you please share some community resources out there that can help, and how can one find out those resources? People may not know where to find out those resources that can help.
Before answering your question, I would like to talk more about the fear and SD survivor cases not being reported from API community, because I have been volunteering here and there and working with them in collaboration in different programs. So one thing that is about our departments is one thing, in this past years, hate crimes really increased in our community. And people are very intimidated by system, because the process for services like T visa and U visa, it's very, very long, very intimidating. Even filling up simple form is, it feels like moving mountains to immigrants who have been traumatized and has come all the way from their country, and those transitional phases and the information that comes with being here, it is very intimidating, and they have to really qualify as the survivors in the first place, and that is the next whole process of it. And I was there for one of my clients, trying to prove that she was SD survivors, and we could not do that instead of all the help we had, because there is lack of evidence. System asks for evidence. They have none of the evidence. Every evidence before they enter United States, they are taken. Their cell phones are not with them. They have really nothing with them to prove, and they have no contacts. They have no every evidence has been erased. At this point, only one their physical presence in the United States is one evidence. And when having one evidence, which is prime, and to make system work on it is very difficult for immigrants. And this has been one of our most challenge, one of the most intimidating challenge for us as community advocates. And ad campaigns, and these people, we have to really prepare them to say, you know what, all the system here, we can navigate that. We do have our rights, and we can claim our rights, saying, you know what, I'm survivor of this, I want to be helped. And if there is something going on with detention centers, if anything is to go wrong with because of language or anything else, right? It's very difficult for us to prove that, because at that time we'll be on defensive asylum, and we'll be not proving why their life is in danger if they are to go back to their countries. And at this point, we are proving that how that interview was wrong. And it's not about survivor anymore. It's about the system itself. So there is one class between system and the challenges survivors come with. So I wanted to put this in front.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us, and that leads to we can come later with the resource question. That actually your experience is asking me to ask another question to Officer Sohal, that if a trafficked victim doesn't have enough evidence that they are trafficked, then how can police department provide right help?
Yeah, that's one of the most tricky parts about labor trafficking, especially when you have survivors coming from so many different locations, where a lot of the fear comes from placed while they were in a different country or different jurisdictions. It's not an easy answer. It's an answer that police departments are still trying to understand as far as labor trafficking goes and how to properly investigate it. My biggest point that I want to bring across with that question is that just make sure it's reported. The police departments have no connection with the asylum processes. The police department, their thing is that, hey, was there some type of criminal violation that occurred? And if there's any type of information, sometimes I tell people, like we were talking about earlier, you might feel like there's not enough evidence, but if there's a police report made, you never know that, hey, there might be some type of pattern that gets established. Multiple people start talking about this. This becomes something that, police departments and communities are working together. So these become topics that aren't taboo and are, kept quiet. Just coming from the Bay Area, within just the Indian community, there's a lot of people that are in businesses, and there could be people that are exploited from other countries that maybe don't have documents. And if there's people that are afraid to talk about this at the temples, at community events, then it becomes very difficult for cooperation with law enforcement to move forward and have that understanding. And so that's my biggest thing, is that because the next step is, yes, we can connect you to resources. And that's what Swastika was mentioning about a lot of these visas. They are very long processes and tough, especially because you're trying to figure out your housing, you're trying to figure out your status, you have family back home. And then on top of it, there's you might dealt with corruption back home, so you're not sure what the timeline is, and there's a lot of delays. So it becomes a very complicated, just a very draining process, just going through the trafficking situation and then navigating past the other part. But my biggest thing is that if we really open up that conversation, we make those reports with police departments that are working together with the community, then maybe you start identifying, hey, these are 5, 6, 7 different people that came here and were exploited by this one business. Okay, now we can work with federal agencies and figure out maybe there's a larger nexus, and going through that, because it needs to be looking at it from a different perspective. Maybe you have each individual case itself doesn't work out. Maybe we look at it from a broader perspective. But that first starts with having community support, so that way when people come forward, they're not worried about the community pressure. That's what I've noticed. I work cases with labor trafficking cases where that's the one big problem is, this is someone that came from the same village as the store owner that trafficked them. And so now them getting that person in trouble, affects their family status back home. And it becomes very multi-layered. And those are things that police departments maybe aren't privy to, and they don't understand why that survivor isn't cooperating. And so that's the other part of it, is law enforcement, continuing to educate themselves on the cultural aspects of it. So I think the short answer is basically working with the community and, partnering with and hearing those stories, working with survivors that can highlight deficiencies within the system, so that way we can continue to go through it. Because I agree, when there's so much trafficking around us, there should be more cases. And as Sharon mentioned, there's a huge underreporting about that. And so there's obviously...
Yeah, you are right, Officer Sohal. It's a very complicated issue, and the more we talk about it, the more we talk with the traffic victims, we will know, and advocates, we will know what are the roadblocks and to get right help, and then probably system can change, or we can provide better help. And community, yes, they're absolutely right. We have to, system and community, they have to work in partnership to end human trafficking. And it is also important to talk about community resources that can help survivors. So speaking which, Sharon and Swastika, if you can share some resources and how one can find those resources, that will be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, our website is probably the easiest way of finding resources in Santa Clara County, but we also list others throughout the Bay Area. But I did also want to just point out, we're talking about the system, and the criminal justice system has the highest standard of proof. But for a lot of survivors, they can get different remedies through the civil justice system. So you can work with the Department of Labor, the EEOC, Department of Fair Equal Employment and Housing. They have a lot of tools as well that can help survivors of trafficking. That's a different standard of proof. And so what I would really recommend is that even if individuals feel like they may not have enough information to go to, say, the police department, you can reach out to a service provider. You can reach out to an attorney to start to figure out, what kind of help can I access for my situation? Immigration system has a different standard of proof than our criminal justice system as well at the state level. So you might qualify for a visa even if your trafficker may not be prosecuted. So realize that there's a lot of different intersecting systems when we talk about it. And so we really want to encourage individuals who may be in situations where they're being exploited, take that first step of seeing if there are, again, service providers that can help, or attorneys who you might be able to speak to about your situation, especially if it deals with an employer. And that's always a good step. You even have your local labor commissions, and they can help in different ways too. So there's some resources on our website. You can also check out the National Human Trafficking Hotline is where you can report 888-373-7888. And you can also check out their website as well, which is National Human Trafficking Resource Center, or polarisproject.org. They're the ones who run that website as well. And you'll find a number of local agencies. We have AKI, we have Maitri, you have Asian Women's Shelter as well, who's part of that. So there's a lot of culturally specific organizations, culturally responsive organizations that can provide help. I don't know if you want to speak more to that, Swostika.
Yes, I have been working with Asian Women's Shelter closely for SD survivors and DV. That could be one source, which is really accessible and culturally understandable agency, I would say. And there is Center for Empowering Refugees and Immigrants that has been one for mental health issues and really making that transition from foreign country to this, and really processing their traumas and understanding their traumas and where it comes from, how it comes from, These are really great sources. There is family justice centers helping, and today I have been hired as case navigator for that, and I'll be working full-time with them. That is one of the resources. And there is Korean Justice Center. There are various resources, community resources, but there are also, like, Asian doesn't mean one represent, like Chinese population is higher, and there are lesser number of population which are underrepresented in system, and there is where the challenges are, Yeah, there is Nepali community, which is really underrepresented. There is Bangladeshi community, which is really underrepresented. And it is high time we have to start thinking on having at least translators or at least flyers in those languages, so they feel welcome when they knock, like, county offices' doors. And welcome centers has been a huge issue for these communities. There are no welcome centers or any community centers that they really can go and then access. So that has been our one hour mission, to have introduced people of Asian community to have welcome centers and culturally appropriate centers where they feel safe and stable to share their experiences and their stories. And storytelling, like different programs from SERI, I would say, Center for Immigrants and Refugees. They are doing this Wellness for Action program, which is like targeted for immigrants and refugees community. And they're reaching out with mental health services and free counseling services, and professionals who work, like, they do have pro bono lawyers with them. They do have health counselors who work for free. There are resources, but one challenge is we do have limited resources, limited community advocates, and more underrepresented community, which makes it more difficult, I would say.
Hopefully, after listening this podcast, many community members will, jump in. They will advocate, and they will do something to help survivors. And I'm sure that many people will visit South Bay Coalition and Human Trafficking website to find out a lot of resources there, to find out about the billboard campaign, so that they can provide their right help. And sometimes it's so complicated. The issue is so complicated and so multi-tiered, as Officer Sohal said, that sometimes victims, they don't even understand that it is they're trafficked, or if they can report that abuse to get help. So they think that, for example, at Maitri, you have seen that some survivors, they think that they are victim of domestic violence, where they are actually victim of human trafficking, because when they come here, all their official documents are confiscated by that person who brought that victim here, and they're working nonstop for in outrageous hours, and maybe sometimes they are used as sex slave, but they think that they're someone's partner, and it is very complicated to even for them to understand that they are not victim of actually domestic violence, they are victim of human trafficking. And as you said, as we are discussing here, it needs a lot of discussion, a lot of understanding this issue, so that we can understand victims, survivors, and provide right help. But I was just wondering, how can we educate community members about the distinction between partner violence and human trafficking? If someone is coming here and actually victim of human trafficking, but that person is thinking that I'm victim of domestic violence, how can you raise awareness? How can you educate that person? Is there any simple way to educate all of us that what is the distinction between human trafficking and
So I would kind of go back to what I said in the beginning, which is we don't want community members to feel like they're responsible for determining if somebody is a trafficking survivor. If you see indications of domestic violence and you connect them to a domestic violence service provider, those service providers have the tools to be able to see that intersection. But for community members, it's important for them to also not think of it as being either or. It can very much be an intersection. We often see intersections with domestic violence sexual assault and human trafficking, or you may see intersections with human trafficking and wage theft. So it's important for community members, just look for the red flags, see if you can refer to an appropriate service or to report to law enforcement. And then those agencies can start to really look at the specifics to see, does this qualify as human trafficking? Are they eligible for immigration relief? They can start to figure out those specific pieces. But for community members, it's really about what doesn't feel right. Is this person having somebody who's taking control of their, finances or their life? Are they in harm's way? And then move from there to getting them help.
Yeah, I think if someone is facing some issues with their partner, and they don't know if it is human trafficking or not, is the best way to find out to connecting with an agency that can educate them about the issue, and that they can guide them to find out if they are victim of human trafficking or not. So we are all, yeah.
Just to piggyback off what Sharan said was, like she was saying, like the public, if it feels wrong, call an advocate, call your local law enforcement agency as well. The big thing is doing the podcasts like this, right? Getting it out to different community members about what human trafficking is, what it looks like in your community, whether that's regionally or whether that's culturally, and making it a space where you feel comfortable about bringing it up. Having avenues to report it. There's through South Bay Coalition, there's so many different agencies that you can report the trafficking to, and just to highlight where the public doesn't need to know, if they feel like it's wrong, maybe they see something that's maybe DV, they call the PD. At San Jose, every domestic violence call that any officer goes to, there's a human trafficking screening tool on there as well. And so at every DV call, they're screening for human trafficking as well. And same thing with advocacy groups. I know that like Next Door Solution, if they get a DV victim, a survivor, they're going to go through it, but there's going to be an HT screening tool as well. And so the biggest thing is, hey, if you see something, report it. And then the other half of it is that, hey, educate your community on what trafficking is, what it looks like, what are these signs, and then what are the agencies you can report it to. So that way, when people do see something and it doesn't look right, they know where to go and who to reach out to.
I would like to add on this too, Nandini. Mm-hmm. As community advocate, first thing when somebody sees something is fishy in their community, we have to have the right help. When immigrant population are intimidated by police departments, we cannot right away call 911 and then said, there is something fishy and you should be coming on with sirens on. We cannot do that. As community advocate, first thing I would do is think about the safety. Are they safe? Are they comfortable talking about this? The first thing that comes to my mind, whenever we meet these vulnerable groups, survivors, they're not ready for the big words like domestic violence, human trafficking survivors. If I'm to say in the first conversation when I meet them, and I know these are the red flags, I know there is something fishy going on, but I cannot be breaking those big words in front of them saying, you're a domestic violence survivor. You are in abusive relationship. I cannot be doing that. I have to do it in a subtle way, finding right help. I know one of the community member who is our head or who is our mentor. She really is bigger sister to me. In that kind of language, we have to really make it cultural and family meeting or lunch or coffee meet, to actually break those. It takes like steps to break those big words and then say, you need to report this to police. And it is really sensitive and it is difficult. They're not ready to even accept and acknowledge that they are in such a situation, because they don't want to be, nobody wants to be victim. Nobody wants to be survivor, really. And when we talk about these things, we have to find right help, right person at the right time. So yes, I agree on the part that we need to call police department and we need to call professionals, but before professionals we need to call people who can convince them and educate them on and the best time when community advocates step in is this. I did have one of the client who was in Devi's situation. I could not convince her that she was in Devi situation. I was saying all the things around Devi. You know what? Are you safe? Are you thinking? Do you need me anytime? You can call me anytime at 2 in the morning. Just call me. I'm that one of your friend, you know. I did said everything other than domestic violence. I'm help because I'm advocate. I'm not going to say that in my community, or not even the Southeast way. So Southeast Asian community, I'll not be going to community events and then saying I'm community advocates. I'll be just saying I work in this place and all I'm doing is studying. That's how I start my conversation. So
it is what you were saying, that it is right to provide a lot of information and support to survivors and victims so that they can take informed decision.
Yes.
So thank you all for sharing. I'm sorry I'm rushing it off because it's almost time to end. So one last question I really want all of you to answer, that if you can share at least 1 or 2 tips that what community members can do to support human trafficking survivors and in preventing human trafficking.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that the community can do is just educating themselves about it, is talking about it, having conversations with amongst each other. If you know that person or have a family member that works at that store or knows that person that is came from a different country or is born here and is going through some type of trafficking situation, or that community member, working with your local community centers, working with your local schools, really making sure that that messaging of what trafficking is put out. Like I said, the only really real way to really investigate this and provide help is if there's a comprehensive team around the survivor. It's like has been mentioned before. People don't want to just go right away to law enforcement. They need to make sure they have the resources around them, and that comes from communal support. So one is just educating it, and then when you do see something, reporting it. So those are the 2 things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sohal really gave the best advice. So it's really about learning about trafficking, learning what those red flags are. And then each of us has our own kind of circle of influence. You know, we might have a community group that we always go to. So sharing the information with that community group. So we're really building capacity, not just to identify trafficking, but also really normalize talking about this type of exploitation when there's so much shame surrounding this, that really opening up these conversations is a really great way to start to break down some of those barriers for a lot of survivors.
I would say use of media. Everyone is in media. Everyone has Facebook. Everyone has, like, most of them have Twitter. And what we can do as community members is we can come to our go to our medias and then say, you know what, all those single stories you hear about United States here, it's not how you enter. Once you are, if your passport is taken away and if your documents are controlled by next person other than you, and you are not having the access of those, then you should be really careful, because there's the red flag, and you should be well informed how you're coming, when you are coming, what are the things that you are going through, and you have to be well informed. That's how we can bust all those single stories and myths about how great America is, and we have to all Rossen. That's one way to educate our community and say, you know what, heads up, this is how the system works here.
Wow, using social media. Good advice. So thank you so much, Sharan, Sohal, and Swastika. All of you shared lots of information, knowledge. Really appreciate your coming to our show and educate us with all this important information. I'm looking forward to see those ad campaign, billboards at the airports and other places, and hopefully people will come forward if they see anything suspicious, and they will report human trafficking. Sharan, you share lots of resources, phone numbers, and people can call human trafficking hotline and South Bay Coalition and Sjpd, San Jose Police Department, and also talk to each other to educate each other about the issue. And I'm sure if we all do our part, we can end this heinous crime. And I'm like, for example, for listeners, if you or someone you know is a victim of human trafficking, and if you are listening to our show today, please know that resources are out there to help. Contact San Jose Police Department, visit the South Bay Coalition and Human Trafficking, call Human Trafficking Hotline, or any local agency that help human trafficking and human trafficking victims. And I'm your host, Nandini Ray, signing off today. But I will be back soon with another interesting episode. Please keep listening to the Maitri podcast Between Friends. Find all our episodes on SoundCloud and wherever you find your podcast. We discuss important issues that matter to our community, and we want all community members, all our listeners, to join this conversation so that we can bring a change. So please like and share our podcast. Bye for now. Stay safe and stay happy. Thank you. This project was made possible by funding provided by Santa Clara County Office of Gender-Based Violence Prevention.
This show is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as legal advice. Always consult an attorney for legal advice. Views expressed by guests of the radio show are individual opinions and not endorsed by Maitri.
Maitri is a free, confidential, non-profit organization based in the San Francisco Bay Area that helps families and individuals facing domestic violence. Don't suffer in silence. Call Maitri Helpline 1-888-8 MAITRI. Visit our website maitri.org.